Welcome to State Senator
Recording
Bill
in
Dodd's
progress.
latest in a series of virtual town halls. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with KSVY 91.3 FM in Sonoma and Sonoma TV, and the topic is latest from Sacramento on the legislative and budget year and what lies ahead for 2022. My name is Rick Wynn, one of the volunteer hosts on KSVY 91.3. This evening's town hall is being presented on multiple platforms, including facebook.com/sendbilldodd, sdo3.senate.gov.ca, Sonoma TV Comcast Channel 27 in the Sonoma Valley, sonomatv.org, Sonoma TV channel on YouTube, and KSVY 91.3 FM in Sonoma, as well as streaming on ksvy.org and on your home smart device or your smart home device. Tonight's event features three distinguished panelists talking about what policymakers did to achieve California's goals this year on issues such as housing, equity, wildfire safety, and pandemic recovery, and what they expect will be the focus in 2022. They will take your questions starting at about 6:30. The studio call-in number is 707-933-9133, starting at 6:30 again, 707-933-9133. Senator Bill Dodd represents all or part of 6 North Bay counties, including Napa, Sonoma, Solano, Contra Costa, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. And now I turn it over to Senator Dodd, who will make opening remarks and introduce this evening's panel. Good evening, Senator.
Thank you very much, Rick. I want to really thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules, and also KSVY for convening this latest in a series of town halls. It is the 15th town hall since this pandemic started. Tonight, we'll be talking about the recently completed legislative and budget year and what we'll be working on in 2022. I'm very glad to be joined by this distinguished group, and thanks to the hundreds of people tuning in tonight, the fact that you are here shows your concern. And we will take your email questions and open the phone lines for your calls at 6:30. The call-in number is 707-933-9133. You know, 2021 started with major challenges and uncertainty. We faced a second year of pandemic losses and serious ongoing problems, from wildfires to homelessness to drought. But Californians are resilient. We are nation leading. Because we observed public health orders to wear masks and practice social distancing early on, we were able to get back on track safer and sooner. We got vaccinated in large numbers. Today, nearly 30 million people in California are vaccinated. And by June 15th, the state was fully reopened. To ensure economic recovery, the legislature, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsome, invested a large portion of our unprecedented $76 billion budget surplus in helping people. We issued stimulus checks to millions and created grant programs to save hundreds of thousands of small businesses that have been brought to the brink by the pandemic. Our balanced budget also included historic investments in K-12 education and homelessness prevention. And with our wildfires growing more destructive and intense each year, we doubled down on our commitment to wildfire prevention and forest management measures. Today and together, we have invested a record $1.5 billion in wildfire prevention. We also agreed to continue our annual $200 million allocation for wildfire safety indefinitely. Because these climate change-driven disasters are ongoing, we must continue to address them. And from a policy perspective, important gains were made to help solve our housing crisis. We also enacted major police reforms with an eye towards fixing our criminal justice system and achieving equity for people of color. Because of pandemic restrictions, legislators all agreed to pare down their bill offerings, yet much was accomplished. Ultimately, the governor put his signature on 770 bills submitted by the 120 members of the state legislature. And I was proud to have 7 of my bills I introduced signed into law. Among them was my bill to encourage prescribed fire burning to rid our wildlands of combustible fuels. Another helps local governments recoup costs associated with public safety power shutoffs. And he also signed my bill creating a special research and development office within CAL FIRE to find better ways to prevent wildfire. To help restaurants stay afloat, the governor signed my to-go cocktails bill, ensuring a much needed revenue stream to support jobs and families. And while that's important, it is kind of ironic that we have so much to do, so many important issues, and with cocktails to go, it got Republicans, Democrats, 100% of all the votes, and people out there just clamoring for more to be done in this area. But seriously, I'm really happy to do that for the many restaurants that have just taken it on the chin day in and day out during the COVID crisis and our shutdown. But as we all know, there's still more work to be done. And like other senators, I expect to bring a new slate of proposals in 2022, as well as some unfinished business from this year. So how did we do this year? What still needs to be done? What should California's priorities be next year? Those are some of the questions that I hope to address tonight with the help of this amazing panel. First, let me introduce them. With us tonight is the second highest ranking executive officer in the state of California, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis. She is our state's 50th lieutenant governor and the first woman elected to this office. And before taking the job in 2019, she served as President Obama's ambassador to Hungary. And as far as I'm concerned, she is the most active, progressive, and just hit the ground running, take charge lieutenant governor that I've seen probably in my lifetime. Also with us here this evening is the leader of the California State Senate, President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. Senator Atkins sets the priorities for what we pursue as a legislative body in the Senate. She was previously Speaker of the Assembly when I was in the Assembly as well, during which time she actually served, I should say, and probably was, for 9 hours as the acting governor. She's the first woman and openly LGBT person to lead the Senate. And why I'm proud of her for those attributes, let me just be clear. That's not why she's the Senate President Pro Tem. She's a Senate President Pro Tem because she is the best person with the skill set necessary to lead the California State Senate when we have so many things to do. I've mentioned so many of these others issues in my prepared remarks here. So I really just love working with her once again in the California State Senate. But last but not least, we have Marisa Lagos, a California politics reporter for KQED. She co-hosts the weekly show, Political Breakdown. She has produced award-winning journalism and commentary. We look forward to hearing from her take on things as well tonight. So if you've ever listened to her programs with Scott and others, I'll tell you, from being a guest on that show as I have, it is a lot of fun, but you'll learn a lot, and it's fast-paced, and I think she has just done a great job. So I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. Now let's hear from Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you so much, Senator. It is really great to be here, and what an honor to be here with you, Madam Pro Tem, and with you, Marissa, who we all respect so much, for this conversation about the budget and this year's legislative cycle. So I am the Lieutenant Governor. That also makes me the President of the Senate. But I'm going to keep my remarks brief because no one has been more central in moving this year's legislative package through than Senator Atkins. But what I will say, just for your listeners and kind of having a sense of what the Lieutenant Governor does, it's a role that's different in every single state, but here in California, our office is very involved in higher education, public higher education. I sit on the board of the CSU, the UC system, and the community college system. And I'm the only person who sits on the board of all three. So we spend a lot of time in this. To you two senators, you have in your districts 2 UCs, Davis and San Diego, at least 4 CSUs between San Diego, Sonoma, San Marco, and East Bay, and maybe I'm even missing one, and then a whole bunch of community colleges. So first, let me just say thank you for everything you did with some really great and important legislation on public higher education. So I also serve on the State Lands Commission, which has about 5 million acres under our purview. Last week, I was out with the Coast Guard. I think, Atkins, you got the same survey of that devastating oil spill from hanging off of the back of a C-27 aircraft. And so doing a lot of work in the area of dealing with offshore drilling and bringing in a new era of wind. Again, wind was a very big part of, wind power is a very big part of this legislative cycle. And then I also work on economic development issues. And the governor and I have a great partnership. He has put me as his representative, California's representative for international affairs and trade. I'm a former U.S. ambassador. I spent a lot of time with our consular corps here in the state and doing trade missions and work in that area. And then the governor also has me on his Council of Economic Advisors. And frankly, as you mentioned, Senator Dodd, the incredible power of this budget, this massive historic $76 billion budget surplus in rebuilding and building the safety net for our people during this unprecedented global pandemic has been extremely important for taking care of our families as so much of the economy is still struggling to come back. And so let me just actually give you one more final shout out, because I tell you this ability for restaurants to be able to deliver and do takeout of alcoholic beverages. I mean, people may laugh because they think, oh, great, I can get a margarita with my burrito order. But the reality is that I don't know that there's been anything more important to small businesses, restaurants, keeping them alive during this pandemic than this feature. Not to mention, I think it's also something consumers have really enjoyed. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, but it's great to be here and I really look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Appreciate it very much. Now on to the Senate Pro Tem, Tony Atkins. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, Senator, thank you for inviting me to join you today. And certainly I want to say thank everyone for participating tonight, those listening in. It's a pleasure to be with our leader, the person we call Madam President. Not many people understand that structure. So, Lieutenant Governor, it's good to be with you, and certainly to my good friend and colleague, Senator Dodd, and also, of course, with one of our finest journalists in the Capitol Press Corps, Marissa. Thank you. It's good to see you. I am particularly happy that Senator Dodd invited me to this town hall because the districts that he and I represent have actually many similarities. People may not understand that or know that. Globally known as destinations for travel and tourism, important agricultural areas, and really a vital military community, just to name a few of our similarities. You know, back in 2003 and 2007, I was on the San Diego City Council. I know that Senator Dodd served locally. Our region was one of the first to experience the devastating wildfires that have become so prevalent here in the 3rd Senate District and throughout our state. So, Senator, I want to thank you for carrying, he mentioned some of his legislation, but SB 109, which will help us find new and better ways to prevent and fight wildfires. Also, congratulations on this bill, but the signing of SB 626, which is your water delivery bill. And I mentioned those because we talk about issues going into the future. Both of these are parts of our historic $15 billion climate package. And of course, it's funny, we both have mentioned, everyone, the alcohol to go. That's been a big boost to so many of our small businesses, and particularly at a time during the pandemic when people have really looked at ways to be out and about safely. To have that was a really wonderful thing. So what an incredible year. I don't want to repeat a lot that my colleagues have said, but the scope of the year definitely deserves to be emphasized. We started with extending the eviction moratorium in January, a budget action, followed by a massive stimulus for working people, small business. Senator Dodd mentioned that, so I won't repeat it. Necessary changes to support our schools, teachers, students as they transition back into in-person learning, expanded health care to all Californians over age 50, invested $12 billion to tackle housing and homelessness. I'm sure people are going to have questions about a lot of this. Took action to close the digital divide during the pandemic, as we will never forget the picture of those kids doing their homework at the Taco Bell so they could get access to Wi-Fi. So infusing $6 billion in broadband infrastructure, we're clearly going to have to work on that going forward to implement it. I'm pleased that Governor Newsome signed the bulk of the Senate's housing package, including my own SB 9. I'm sure people will have comments about that, to allow additional housing units on individual lots. Looking forward to ensuring that these bills are implemented as intended, with all of the protections and safeguards in place. The governor also signed my SB 1, which gives the state and local communities new tools to push back against the damage that sea level rise has caused by a warming climate. And I know that's one of the topics people want to discuss. It's important for all California communities. Some of the things I mentioned that Senator Dodd's district and my district share: tourism, agriculture, the military, and not only to mention drinking water, are all vulnerable to sea level rise. So it's important that SB 1 is now a statewide priority. But so when I look at back to the end of, I would say, my first session in 2011 during the Great Recession, I'm reminded of so many of the difficult cuts and hard choices we had to make back then. So thanks to 10 years, I think, of responsible budgeting by Democratic legislators and governors, and with the recovery funds from our federal partners that have been allocated so far, I think, as Senator Dodd referred to it, California had a once-in-a-generation chance to make really transformational change this year. And we seized that opportunity, I think. So there's a lot more to do on the topics that I mentioned, several other chronic challenges as well. But I just want to end there and say thank you again for the commitment to having us here tonight. We've got a lot to talk about as it relates to protecting our environment, the economy, to certainly ensure environmental justice in California, some of the public safety issues that Senator Dodd also mentioned. And to our Lieutenant Governor, I want to thank her for her stewardship over some pretty critical issues related to education, but also a lot of work with the other boards that she serves on. So I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. Appreciate you being here tonight. And now we're going to turn it over to Maritza Lagos. You're on.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the kind words, Lieutenant Governor and Senate President Pro Tem. I've actually had, all three of you all on our show, so we've had a fun time digging into their biographies if folks get a chance. We actually surprised Senator Dodd with a clip from when he was in high school in a newspaper. So had some fun with that. But no, on a more serious note, it's been, I would say, just from my perspective, a strange last two sessions, not being in the building. I personally like to think of our Capitol reporters as really the eyes and ears for all of the citizens of California who obviously have day jobs and can't be up there watching things go down. So it feels, I don't know, it still feels a little disjointed, right? Because we haven't had that regular kind of meeting and coming together and being in person. So many, committee hearings watched on Zoom like we're doing right now. But I think what Senator Atkins said is absolutely true. I mean, it was a very productive year, especially considering how disrupted 2020 was because of the pandemic and the real need to focus on COVID. I'm just going to highlight a handful of areas I think that there was some real movement on, and that I also expect to see, more conversations. We can talk a little more later, I think, about next year. But housing was a big area. I really think in my time in the legislature, we've seen a real sea change around the way that the legislature is thinking about housing policy. We had several bills passed this year that are really going to make it easier to build multifamily units in areas that have traditionally been more single family zoned. And also to add, we've seen this kind of incrementally, I think, over the past years at both the local and state level, but just making it easier for folks to add ADUs or in-law units. And so I think it's, like a lot of the stuff I'm about to hit on, we are not going to see changes overnight, but I am sort of having the benefit of, I've been covering Sacramento for over a decade. Just the conversation around housing, I think, is really different. And so that's one thing that struck me this year. Criminal justice reform, we continue to see, steps by the legislature to really change, I think, the way that the state thinks about criminal justice. One of the most watched bills this year, I would say, was around decertifying police officers. So basically creating a system so that if an officer is found to have committed misconduct or even done something illegal under the color of their badge, they can't just resign and walk over to another agency, which unfortunately has happened quite a bit. So this really brings California in line with, I think, 46 other states that have this type of process. There was also a couple pieces of legislation I was watching around kind of either eliminating or softening these mandatory minimum sentences and enhancements that were really leaned on during the 90s and early 2000s and had the result of helping sort of pack our prisons. So those included, giving judges more leeway around drug sentences and gang enhancements. Another bill that, especially those of us in the media, watched very closely was also the creation of statewide standards for law enforcement's use of rubber bullets and chemical irritants. So really kind of limiting that, which is obviously a huge issue for protesters, but I bring it up too because those of us in the media are often on the front lines at those protests and sometimes can be either misidentified or maybe not misidentified by police officers and targeted. Workers' rights, we saw a handful of bills signed by the governor, including one that essentially takes aim at those quotas you hear about at Amazon warehouses. Another one that takes aim at those piece rate garment pay. So really trying, I think, on these consumer protection laws to make sure that people who are working, a job are being treated fairly. And I think that's another area we're going to see this legislature continue to dig in on. We've had such a change in our workforce over recent years that, I know there's a lot of ink spilled over AB5 and just the question of the gig economy. But I think we're also seeing these more maybe nuanced attempts to get at some of the challenges we've seen in this economy. And then finally, wildfire legislation. We've talked about Senator Dodd's two really landmark pieces. I do think, again, having watched this issue, the reason I got to know Senator Dodd was the reporting I did in the aftermath of the 2017 fires up in Napa and Sonoma and Mendocino. And I think, again, it's maybe taken a little longer than a lot of people would have liked, but there is a real investment that we're seeing coming from the state and I think in some cases with federal partners at not just responding to fires once they break out, but doing this kind of controlled burns that Senator Dodd's talking about, prevention efforts. And so that's another area that, we're behind the 8 ball on that, right? So it's going to take some time to really see the impacts. But I do think, I'll just say I'm heartened by the fact that a lot of these conversations are just, I think are more nuanced than they were even a few years ago. There's more recognition and understanding that this isn't just, environmentalists versus somebody else or whatever, however the construct is, but that everyone kind of needs to put their heads together. And it rained last night, so I'm going to be happy about that. And it's supposed to rain, I think, the rest of the week here in the Bay Area. So little good news there that I'll end on.
Well, thank you very much, Marisa. Rick, I think it's time for some questions now. Appreciate the panel's input.
Okay, boy. There's no questions. Good night, everybody. You've all covered it very, very well. And we had a number of questions about the recall. Of course, that was probably one of the biggest statewide news items of the year. And it turned out to be, I don't know, a paper tiger or whatever, considering the way the vote went. So the question is, and this is for Lieutenant Governor, describe what you think needs to be done to reform the recall system?
Sure, I'd be happy to address that, Rick. And let me just start by saying that, we elect our governors for 4-year terms. And one of the things that I heard most commonly from people, who had varying differences of opinions of how the state is handled and the governor had handled the pandemic. But most people really did feel that a recall process should only be used if something really, really serious has happened. A dinner party, for instance, would not meet the threshold. And so if anything, this was a nearly $400 million exercise in educating the public on what a recall election is. And so it wasn't surprising to me that at the end of it, that the governor would beat the recall by roughly the same proportions that he won election 3 years ago. And a year from now, he's going to be on the ballot again. So I think at this point, after we're through the process, again, most of the folks who I speak with feel like we should probably reform the system because at the end of the day, it was not necessary and it was not worth it. But in terms of how to fix it, well, and I'm sure that Senate Pro Tem Atkins, who is working on convening a group to talk about what a reform should look like, I really just have one kind of position or piece that I want to put forward on this. And that is that it's very easy for people to say, well, the ballot is confusing. So the question should just be, should the governor be recalled? And if it happens, then the lieutenant governor should step in and complete the term. And I guess people are surprised that I would be strongly against that, but I am. And the reason that I am against it is very simple. And that is that the lieutenant governor, whoever she or he is, should never be incentivized for the governor to fail. Because the lieutenant governor is already in a very tricky situation trying to do the job of this separate constitutional office without, with honoring the fact that these are two separate constitutional offices, where in my view, we should also, and we do in the case of Governor Newsome and myself, work together wherever we are in alignment in our policy priorities. And as I mentioned before, there are a couple of areas that we already work very closely on. That would be strained even further. The relationship would be strained. And typically there is finding a good balance between the governor and lieutenant governor has been difficult historically. And so the idea that you would make it even more strained by this idea that the lieutenant governor would somehow become governor if the governor failed, to me would just make this job very, very difficult for anyone to be able to do well. So that's kind of my 2 cents, and I appreciate the opportunity to pitch that to Senate Pro Tem while she's on here. But I think that the people of California seem to really want to have a robust discussion on this and on this process. And my view is that whatever we do, it would not be beneficial for that one tweak to happen, certainly not alone.
Senator Atkins, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. And I was actually happy to hear that perspective because, of course, a lot of people are weighing in with their perspective and positions. I've seen articles in the media, et cetera. The one thing I would say is, obviously, I agree with the Lieutenant Governor, a robust discussion that includes the public extensively because that's important. And ultimately, whatever is discussed and comes out of the legislative process, both chairs of the Elections Committee and the Assembly and the Senate have joint hearings scheduled. Senator Glazer and Assemblymember Berman, I think they're going to be holding 2 legislative hearings this fall going into next year. Obviously, legislators may have proposals and bills that will be vetted. But a reminder, ultimately, whatever is determined will go before the voters. And so I think that robust discussion that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned is critically important. And I look forward to that conversation and making sure, and I know the media will cover it widely and make sure that the conversations are available for all in a very transparent manner.
And Senator, if I could just really quick, I also didn't mean to minimize people being upset about the governor's attendance at that dinner party, by the way, because people were upset, and we as public officials are held to a very high standard. He apologized for it and regrets it. And we all do everything we can to live up to the standards that we are putting forward for the people of the state of California. My only point is that people would have a chance a year from now in a regularly scheduled election if for them that is a reason for them not to want to vote for his reelection, and not enough to have a whole big expensive special election over.
Marisa Lagos, is there any doubt that Governor Newsom will be reelected in 2022?
Sure. I mean, I don't make predictions after 2016, but I think, he does seem to come out of this recall in a much stronger position, you could argue, politically than he went in. I think that if it had been closer, as close as polls indicated it might have been, if the Democratic base hadn't turned out, you could have seen a world where he could get challenged from the left. But I think coming out of this with the numbers we saw, I mean, the GOP just has a ceiling in California statewide. And I think that is why you hear a lot of people who may not even love Governor Newsom, but who are frustrated by the fact that this recall occurred. I mean, I think that there's like a kind of a few buckets of potential reform. There's the question of, should it be a higher threshold to get something on the ballot? So maybe more signatures. That's one potential reform. To the lieutenant governor's point, I think another question is, should it be 2 ballots? Should there be a second sort of runoff if you decide to recall a governor? And maybe that would create a situation where a lieutenant governor was, in the position temporarily. But I do think that what Democrats really struggled with when if the recall was looking like it could have been successful, then how do you deal with that? Do you not vote for a candidate? We saw in 2003 how complicated it gets when a high profile member of the same party puts their name on that replacement ballot. And so I think that that's a really, a ripe area for at least examining whether it makes sense. I'll just say one other thing, which is this was sort of a perfect storm. I mean, really, yes, the French Laundry dinner was ill-advised and helped sort of spark a national conversation and attention. But there were so many things that lined up, unfortunately for the governor, in this short period of time. We really had the judge decide to give more time for signature gathering the same day of that dinner, the same time as this winter surge was happening, and people were being asked to stay home after what had already been such a trying year, combined with the fact that we were coming out of the 2020 election. And I think there was just a lot of attention on like red versus blue and the COVID debates that were raging. And so I know that people, I think it's understandable that people are looking at reforms, but I also think that the truth is we've only done this twice, and they've both been relatively extraordinary situations. So that's some food for thought. Although I will say that here in San Francisco, we're now looking at a potential of 4 recalls of local officials. I know that there was just an attempt to recall the Sonoma district attorney funded by one person. So I do think that, Californians love direct democracy, but there's certainly room for conversation about whether it is working properly.
We're going to switch gears here. Our phone lines are open at 707-933-9133. That's 707-933-9133. And online, we have Sam of Vallejo who wants to ask a question about unemployment benefits. Sam, you there?
Yes, sir. Hi. The unemployment rate in California is the highest in the country and growing, and the back-to-work rate is the slowest. We got a $75.7 billion budget surplus. If the governor won't use some of it to reenact pandemic unemployment assistance, can't the state legislature do that? There are people suffering out here, and you need to listen to us. You need to start listening. We are in dire straits financially because of this.
Senator Atkins, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think I would agree with the caller that we have felt very much the pain that our constituents across the state are feeling. And the legislature does have the ability, working with the governor through a budget process. It is a three-party agreement between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor. I think it's why you saw a lot of work around tenant landlord evictions, the moratorium extension, protection. I think it's why you saw the legislature increase the earned income tax credit, $8.1 billion, and funding working families and people making up to $75,000. Obviously, we know that people are still hurting despite all of the dollars that we put out as stimulus. We added to the federal stimulus in California because we did have a reserve and additional money. And we continue to look at how to support individuals as well as small businesses. Senator Dodd talked about that. But to the caller, yes, we do have the ability to continue to do that and to look at what is possible, not just for unemployment, but for childcare and a number of other things. So I don't know if Senator Dodd wants to add to that, but I hear you, and we do want to continue to try to put money on the ground to the people that need it the most, that are still struggling. We had more than 25.4 million claims since March 1st of 2020. That's about $177 billion, and it overwhelmed our system. And we tried to get the money out the door as quickly as possible, and that created some problems within our system. We still have a backlog of about 138,000 claims and cases that we're trying to work through. But I hear you, and I know that Senator Dodd, and I'll take that back to our colleagues and continue to try to push for additional assistance.
I thank you very much, Senator. I think you hit the nail on the head there. You know, we've also been getting a lot of calls from people telling us to end the unemployment because people aren't coming back to work. So, but, you know, we do want to listen to you, to the caller. I have a district office in Vallejo. I wish you would call our district office. We have people, I'm telling you, my staff has worked so hard. I'm so proud of them all throughout my district, you know, trying to be a backstop for the unemployment department, and the customer service levels. Never before have they had the type of volumes and demands in that department that they had this year. It's not an excuse, but what we wanted to do was back them up, and my staff is doing it. So please reach out, and maybe there's some targeted, there's some targeted areas that we can do something about. I'm very interested in listening to you. Thank you.
Again, our call-in number is 707-933-9133. On line 3, we have Vincent Ma of Solano Transpo Authority about future funding. Vincent, you're on.
Speakers for being here tonight. My question is, as we come out of the pandemic, we're seeing a lot more people on our freeways. And in the original Senate budget, the legislative budget, there was additional allocations for transportation, which have now been reverted back to the general fund. What do you foresee coming up in the next legislative session about getting more funding for transportation?
Well, this time I'll start. What I'm hoping is that at the federal level, they can, by the time our legislative session starts, that we may have the biggest infrastructure package that we've ever seen in modern history, out of Washington, D.C. And not just to have a total free lunch, but we can supplement that budget and do more in this area than we've ever done before. And I think there's an appetite in this area. The leadership that the Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins is exhibiting in our budget, our transportation chair is very, very active in this area. And, I think the moment is going to be set up by whatever the federal government does.
Can I add just a little bit to that? The legislature, we pretty much we did the regular budget, but mostly throughout the year, we were doing budget trailer bills and actions because our revenue changed so much throughout the year. Tax filing dates were extended, which had an impact on how California received the revenues in which to put towards the budget. And then, we saw that we had more revenue than we had anticipated. And as we did all of those budget items, we actually did not come to agreement or three-party agreement between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor on a transportation package. And so that is outstanding and pending. And I would say that as we go back into session in January, you're going to see not only dependent on the outcome of the federal government, as Senator Dodd mentioned, but you're going to see the legislature picking this up and pushing forward because active transportation, dollars for support for operational transit systems, whether we're talking high-speed rail, whether we're talking infrastructure projects, you're going to see us pick that discussion up and continue to talk about what we can do.
We have, okay, I've got a question. They're giving me another call-in question, but I'm going to wait for just a second. Lieutenant Governor, you are the first woman Lieutenant Governor. We described that. What's a day like in your life?
Wow. Well, a little bit of a departure from the conversation that we're having, but maybe I can kind of weave it back into the context of the legislative cycle. But, my days vary a lot. I am a statewide elected official, so I represent every one of the 58 counties, and I really work hard to try to get out to meet voters and constituents and Californians where they are. I went to all 58 counties when I was running for reelection, and I still try to get back to not just the common places, there where you would expect, Los Angeles, Bay Area, up here, San Diego, but really to some of the less traveled places. And I really like to get out there and go to college campuses and meet students. I also spend a lot of time with, as I mentioned before, the diplomatic corps in this state. Pre-pandemic, 1 out of every 5 jobs in California was related to travel and tourism. And, as we've heard from the last few questions, that is an industry that has been hit the hardest. And many of the jobs still have not come back and are not scheduled to come back for a while, though we are starting to see the green sprouts of travel and tourism coming back, but we're a long way to go. But when I meet with our consuls general, a lot of the conversation is about foreign direct investment into the state of California. Countries like Japan and Germany are very important for foreign direct investment. Countries like Mexico, of course, it's the busiest land border crossing in the world, our border with Mexico. 40% of containerized shipping into the United States comes through our massive port complexes in California, especially Long Beach and LA, but really all up and down the coast. So I spent a lot of time in that space, but I also have had now the opportunity, this in my 3rd year in office, to sponsor legislation. And what I really try to do with the office of the Lieutenant Governor is, when I was elected, they said, well, it's kind of a funny job, but it's a bully pulpit because you are elected statewide. People, will give you a hearing if you have an opinion on things. And so generally speaking, these really big bills, some of the ones that we've talked about, but I think Marissa was talking about criminal justice reform. That's really with the Senate Pro Tem, with Speaker Rendon, and with the governor, the bills tend to make their way between the 2 houses in the governor's office. But there are hundreds of pieces of legislation, some of which are really important, but aren't necessarily going to make headlines. And we try to find those bills, and we think of ourselves as sort of a strike team, where if we can find a bill that we think is really important and get the kind of attention drawn to it, that we can help move it along. So, for instance, last year, we were very involved in a bill that would ban the sale of flavored vapes. I have kids who were in college when they were in high school, this whole epidemic of vaping in middle school and high school, and even some kids in 5th and 6th grade came out to the fore. So we got involved with that. There was a spousal rape bill this year. As you noted, I'm the first woman elected lieutenant governor. So issues around equity, particularly for women, we really try to spend a lot of time and focus on. That bill, fortunately, was passed and signed by the governor. And then we talked about these higher education bills. And, you know, I'm really, really excited about 2 of them in particular. And they're, again, not ones that are going to make a lot of headlines. They make headlines in education journals, but not necessarily, you know, on the front page of newspapers or on Politico, but they're really, really important to making our system of students being able to start in a community college and then make their way to a 4-year college, if that's what they want to do, to make that system easier and more streamlined. So about 40% of the almost 3 million students currently enrolled in public higher education in the state of California, about 40% of the first in their family to go to college. So for, you know, many kids, they've got mom, dad, they went to college. They can sit down with them and talk through how to come up with their pathway. But for a lot of kids in our state, they're navigating it themselves for the first time. And so it's important to invest in counselors, but it's also, there's a lot we can do, particularly in this era of advanced technology. There's a lot we can do to just make it more user-friendly and simpler. So the average number of credits right now for students who go from a community college into a 4-year college is much higher, that the credits that they have, than they actually need to transfer. So there are multiple reasons for this, but what these 2 bills that passed this year around associate's degree for transfer reform and course numbering just are sort of the bread and butter of what the experts in the education think tank, who work really, really hard on this issue, and for what we hear from students and the legislature hears from students and elected officials in the Senate and the Assembly hear from students, can just make the system more user-friendly and easier to navigate. So that's really exciting. And again, I love being on this. Again, Senator Atkins, who is at in the eye of the storm of which bills move forward, which bills become 2-year bills, which bills go back for more work. But in our office, in the LG office, we really take a lot of pride in being able to be part of the system and act, as I said, as sort of a strike team on some of the bills that could get lost in the shuffle, but that we think are really important.
Thank you. Thank you. And just a note, 50 years ago when I graduated from college, my first job was with the Coordinating Council for Higher Education, which was trying to put together the system whereby people would go to junior college and then go to state college or UC. John McGuire is on line 2 with a question on Highway 37. John?
Hello, this is John, of course. And my question is about the terrible situation of Route 37 that has been going on for so long. It's almost analogous. It's almost analogous to fusion energy. It's always going to be 20 years in the future. What can be done to make that road safer, especially at night? Most people drive with high beams on all the time.
Well, I appreciate that question. Senator McGuire and I have been really working on this with the 4 counties, Napa, Sonoma, Solano, and Marin County, that are all our citizens are impacted in this area. We have a number of different issues with it, and also the assembly members that represent these districts as well been working hard on it. There's an interim project that we're proposing that would add a lane each way during commute times. And frankly, when we say interim, that's something that needs to be about 5 years to the max. It would also put a flyover there by the Sonoma Raceway. So that would be from 101 going into 37, over 37, towards Sonoma and Napa. maybe a roundabout in there as well. But ultimately, I really do believe this whole area from Vallejo to Marin County will become the first major congestion relief, safety, and sea level rise mitigation project in the state of California. We were fortunate to be able to have meetings with the State Transportation Department, Caltrans, and the local leaders here just about 4 weeks ago to really emphasize to the state how critically important sea level rise is. Not going to wait for us to get this job done through the normal processes that we've had in the past to get a job done. The caller said it's no good waiting 20 more years, and he is absolutely right. And those safety projects are just as critically important. But we already know the sea level rise has already caused at the western end of Highway 37 flooding, where they've had to shut down Highway 37. I think it was about 3 years ago for 2 or 3 weeks. That is, and it just reroutes all the traffic around the San Rafael Richmond Bridge, and so this is something that we are really on. And I would encourage the caller, Mr. McGuire, to look out for your county, whether it's Marin, Sonoma, Napa, or Solano, and be able to comment on this so that you can make, and any other callers, make your viewpoints known. Thank you.
Living in Sonoma, it is certainly an issue. Another question from Richard Grange of Pittsburgh. He had 3 questions. One of them was about the security of elections. And it was about, are California's elections safe and secure, and is there any evidence of widespread election fraud in 2020 in California? And a quick answer from whoever would like to take that.
I'll take that.
A no and a yes, maybe?
I don't have a dog in this fight. We have incredibly secure elections. We have registrars of both parties around the state who have worked very hard to make that so. And we are now moving forward, going to have all male elections, not male, female, male in. Every time I say that, it sounds weird. But yeah. So the legislature and governor just made that permanent. And we know that this is really changing the way a lot of people vote. So it'll be exciting to see. But yes, no fraud, no problems. Sometimes small problems with lines or other hiccups with technology, but nothing widespread.
Senator Dodd, since we're supposed to be talking about Senator Atkins as well, about 2022, what of your bills that were postponed in 2021 do you plan to bring back next year?
Well, we're going through that process. Frankly, without getting specific, on the bills themselves, I expect to bring 13 bills back that I already had, in the system. So we're already going to be active there right away. We're working and listening to people. So if there are people out there that have a bill idea, sometimes you never know. We hear from our constituents about a problem that we have within our district or within our state, and we get some pretty fantastic ideas. So we're looking to hear your ideas, but we will be very active. And unless, of course, let's just hope that we're not asked to reduce our bills again. But you know what? We don't control what's going on around us. We've seen that very clearly over the last 2 years. But I really, I want to give Senator Atkins, she doesn't need it, but I want to give her a shout out, because running an operation like the Senate, particularly during a COVID environment, is an extremely complex, management. And her team have just really done a fabulous job, particularly when you have, 39 other senators, because she is a senator, 39 other senators that think all their bills should be heard, of course. And, look at during COVID and distancing and everything, there are considerations like how big are the meeting rooms? How many people can meet in those meeting rooms and still do it all? And they just really set us up for success in getting the bills through that we were able to get through.
There was a question that was addressed to Senator Atkins to describe the duties as the Senate President pro tempore, which is that's the full pronunciation. And from a policy standpoint, to tack on that, what needs to be the focus in your mind in 2022? And we've got about 2 minutes left for that answer.
Well, I appreciate it. And, I hope, like Senator Dodd, that we are going to be through the pandemic to the point where we can have enough hearing rooms and, we're going to adhere to the safety precautions, et cetera. But I'm hopeful that we can come back, and members come here to do legislation to support their communities. And I really believe that's so important, but it has been difficult. And I appreciate the caucus pivoting so that we could do this work. And I appreciate the speaker. I would anticipate that we're going to continue to see critical issues around wildfire, drought, housing, homelessness, clearly working our way through the pandemic, the economic issues outlined by callers, by our Lieutenant Governor, obviously healthcare, and I'm going to add mental health care, behavioral health, because all of that is associated with some issues around homelessness. So we always have a full agenda, and because of the revenues that we've had and the leadership of our governor, I think we've been able to tackle so many of these issues, but we need to build on that. And so with the critical issues that we've had to focus on, we hope to be able to make up ground on a lot of issues and programs that are going to help Californians have better lives. And so I think we've got a full agenda. I just hope we're going to be able to do it as we transition into a new building, as we figure out how we're going to be able to have all of those hearings.
I want to thank you all very much on behalf of KSVY and our listeners. We had a lot of questions that we didn't get to. Senator Dodd, I'll let you wrap it up.
Well, Rick, thank you very much. We've made great progress this year, despite the challenges that we've heard. There's still much work to be done. I look forward to working with my partners in Sacramento in the coming year. Please reach out to my office if you have any ideas or need help. I really want to thank KSVY, Rick, again, our 15th one that we've been able to partner on, and to Madam Pro Tem, our Lieutenant Governor, and Marisa. This has been a great panel tonight. Thank you all very, very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. And thanks for listening in. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Night.